Hey, welcome back to Trek on the Tube. Both parts of Star Trek Discovery's Terra Firma have been released. The story is now complete. The amount of Easter eggs and references and canon connections it's quite large, in fact. And it's about time to talk about all that. Right quick, I do want to wish everyone a very happy holiday season, and I do want to apologize if you hear any baby noise in the background. That's just baby on the tube. Everyone's at home now. It's the holiday season, so of course, things aren't as calm as they usually are. Alright, so here we go. Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 9 and 10, Terra Firma, Parts 1 and 2. For starters, I'm under the impression this thing was quite divisive, as in some people didn't like the 2-episode detour the show took, while others very much did. And I guess I can see why some didn't like it, but I loved it, truly. I think it's no secret at this point that I'm not the biggest fan of the serialized Star Trek that we've had so far. Now, I'm not saying that format can't work for the franchise, I'm just saying the examples of it we've seen up until this point haven't been the best. So when a serialized show like Discovery takes the time to make an episode semi-episodic, dare I say, by creating a self-contained story for it, I tend to like it better. And with this two-parter, they took that even further. I used the word detour earlier, and that wasn't a mistake. I meant to use that word because that's exactly what we got. Not only was it a narrative departure from this season's overarching story, but it was almost a complete format change-up where arguably these two parts weren't even semi-serialized. They were just their own thing. And thus, as you can imagine, I loved that so much. I didn't mind putting elements like the burn or the emerald chain or the Kelpian ship distress signal to the side for a minute in order to explore the smaller scale story, or rather more character-driven story that we got. On the contrary, I think that's what makes the best Star Trek. In Voyager, the objective is to get home, but we stop and explore along the way. In Deep Space Nine, there comes a point where there's a devastating war going on, but we still find time to tell character-driven stories. I guess maybe it's true that perhaps here, it feels a bit more like a complete stop in the progression of the season due to Discovery's overall serialized nature, but like I said, this kind of stuff often makes for the most compelling and innovative stories. Season 2's New Eden comes to mind as another example. Terra Firma, both parts, were a wonderfully directed, skillfully acted, quasi-mirror universe adventure that was such great fun to go on. It was a joy seeing the mirror universe again. I think those were some of the first season's strongest episodes, and so calling back to them, exploring that alternate world is just fun to me. It's an absolute win. This time, of course, we got Mira Burnham in all her eccentric glory. You could tell Sonequa Martin-Green was having so much fun with her performance, and it really came through and sold the final product. Great performance on her part. The same goes for everyone else, by the way, especially Michelle Yeoh. She was so great in these 2 episodes. Now, you guys know I love Michelle Yeoh, and I think we can all agree that she's probably one of the most famous people ever to be in Star Trek, and I've said this multiple times at this point, I was just never sold on her Emperor Georgio. But here something was different. Yeoh seemed much more comfortable portraying this toned down version of the character. And it's the best I've seen her in Discovery since back in the pilot episode where she was Prime Philippa. So yeah, great performance from all the regular cast, and of course, a massive shout out to the man behind Carl, aka the Guardian of Forever. He was elusive and aloof, he was fun and yet imposing. More on him in a second though. As we just mentioned, Emperor Georgio hasn't always been my favorite character on this show, and for a long time I truly believed she was irredeemable. I make a point of saying that because I was also very confused as to how this character would end up leading a Section 31 show, but here we are. 10 episodes down the Discovery Season 3 line, and not only am I convinced that the Emperor has fundamentally changed, but we've also got her appearance as main character for that new show all ready to go thanks to the conclusion of this 2-parter. It was well done, especially considering I didn't believe in this. I didn't believe it would be possible, it would be accomplished, but yeah. Anyway, back to the Guardian. I didn't believe they were actually gonna do this, because Discovery has a history of not really explaining things in great detail, so I was expecting to kinda be left in the dark at the end of the story, I guess, concerning this Carl guy, but no, we got a straight explanation, a detailed explanation, dare I say. Carl is an identity, or an appearance that the Guardian can assume in order to communicate, and he's on this planet simply because he ran away, so to speak. Does it bug me that the lore for the Guardian has changed a little now? No, really not. All-powerful entities like this in Star Trek have been seen in every iteration, and they're never really fleshed out as characters or species. So changes for the sake of changes, or in this particular instance, for the sake of narrative purposes and a spin-off show setup, is okay by me. I loved seeing the Guardian again, and I loved the way they used him. And yeah, I truly do applaud Discovery for taking the time to explain things. I wasn't expecting that. To finish up with the writing side of things that we started on earlier, I do think the plot itself was kind of straightforward, simple, even. Yes, there were reveals and twists, I guess, but nothing that we as a fandom hadn't already predicted by the time Part 2 came out. But that's not a bad thing, because having a to-the-point story enabled the episodes to really develop its primary characters. In this instance, mainly the Emperor. Although I must admit that this whole thing about Mirror Universe people wanting to die with honor came a bit out of the blue. I think they kind of used that as an excuse to get Georgio on the planet. I don't know where that came from, but it works, it's fine. You know what? This is why I like how I review double episodes that have the same name, how I like to review them together. Because this really was one singular story, and I feel it needs to be treated as such. A huge congratulations to the writing team on this one, I really liked it. From the continuity nods to the deep dives into Georgio's psyche, and also, you know, the fact it was a low-key soft pilot. I do use the term loosely, of course. This wasn't exactly a soft pilot in the sense that it didn't give us any new characters or a setting for the upcoming Section 31 show, but it did set up Georgio's return. Unless they were actually setting up the Guardian of Forever to be a character on the Section 31 show, that would explain why they gave him a humanoid form and appearance, that Carl persona. I'd like that. That would actually be pretty cool. Alright, the makeup was over the top, and that's what made it fun. The costumes were ridiculously fantastic. The VFX, like for example the Guardian transformation, were obviously fake, but they were visually appealing. As I mentioned earlier, both episodes were well directed, and I even liked the flipped and negative opening credits that they did. They didn't need to do that, but I liked the fact that they did. And I did just want to point out that every time Admiral Vance and Saru are in a scene together, I love it so much. I think this Admiral Vance fellow is a great addition to the cast, and I think that having someone that can guide and teach Saru how to be a captain is a really good thing for not only the character but also the show. Good two-parter. That's my conclusion. It's now time to move on to the Easter eggs and references part of the video, starting with all of the ones I could find in Part 1, as in Episode 9, and bear with me people, because straight out the gate, it's gonna get complicated. As in, this handsome fellow is said to have come from an alternate timeline created by the temporal incursion of a Romulan mining ship. This is a direct reference to the events depicted in Star Trek, the 2009 movie. The Romulan mining ship Kovich is talking about is the Narada, and that temporal incursion is the very one Spock goes through. It is now known to the fandom as the Kelvin timeline. Now, the name Kelvin timeline is the official designation for that alternate timeline that both the fans and Viacom CBS, or at least Paramount at the time, are now using. That doesn't make the designation itself canon though, because the words Kelvin timeline have never been used on screen. Yor is depicted wearing a uniform very reminiscent of the one seen in the first season of The Next Generation. There are a few differences, however. These differences do not create continuity errors, because even if he is from 2379, the year the events of Nemesis took place in the Prime timeline, and technically that uniform is probably from, you know, about 10 years earlier, Yor is in fact from the Kelvin timeline. And before he popped up on our screens, we had never seen what a 24th century Kelvin timeline uniform looked like. No need to call the canon cop, continuity is safe. Now that we've got a lot of the technicalities revolving around Yor out of the way, let me just take the time to mention that this is the first ever confirmation on screen by someone in the Prime timeline that the Kelvin timeline was indeed created at the moment of the destruction of Romulus. I have firmly believed for a long time, along with many others, that the Kelvin timeline must have been around sometime before that. I even made a video about it, but canon and continuity are not matters of opinion, and so as it stands, until some other character comes out and explains it differently on screen, the Kelvin timeline is a temporal divergence of sorts that was created at that moment. What do you mean, how does that make me feel, Bob? Come on, it makes me feel fine. It's okay. I'll just update the timeline graphic. That's what we were planning on doing anyway. Oh, shut up, Bob. Sorry about that. Let us now move on to the mention of the Temporal Wars, which was something we kinda got a glimpse of in Enterprise. We've also heard about this a few times in this season of Discovery. And to finish off with this Yor fellow, he is a, I still can't pronounce this thing, Betelgeusian. You know what? It's explained that he is of the species by the production team. We saw one of them in the first episode of the season as well, though it must be pointed out that it hasn't been said on screen that he is part of that species. So, yeah. Oh, and I also forgot to mention this. He died because he was both temporally displaced and no longer in his original timeline. This made him sick. We haven't heard of this specific issue in Star Trek before, but things like temporal psychosis or quantum signatures have been used as technobabble over the years to either illustrate how jumping around in time can hurt you, or how hopping from one timeline to another can be noticed biologically, if you're looking for the clues. That's it for the most headache-inducing part. Star Trek, am I right? The timelines and all of that? Let's move on to some more funner elements. Not a word from you. This medical holographic recreation of a patient is similar to what we've seen Voyager do before. The USS Hiragaganai was most likely named after the Japanese pharmacologist of the same name, and at one point Stamets wants to use a ship's prefix codes in order to hack it. We've seen this done before in The Wrath of Khan. To end all of this, we now need to mention Carl, his newspaper, and the Mira Universe. First of all, the Mira Universe is yet again one of those alternate timelines we were talking about just a few seconds earlier. Not only has it been featured in the original series Deep Space Nine and Enterprise before, but also in the first season of Discovery. Carl is a seemingly all-knowing, all-powerful entity randomly placed on some planet. I'm gonna get into his real identity when we do the references for episode 10. At this point, all I can say is all-powerful, weird people just chilling on planets is a very Star Trek thing. Finally, his newspaper, the Star Dispatch. This is a fake newspaper name that was used in many Hollywood productions once upon a time. In Star Trek, it was seen before in the original series episode called The City on the Edge of Forever, where an all-powerful weird being on a planet sends people back in time. What I'm showing here on screen is a beautiful and very clear breakdown of the articles featured. It was made by the good people over at Trek Core, so shout out to them. Basically, everything here is a reference to events that we've either seen or heard about in other episodes of Star Trek. The USS Jenolan reported missing is from Relics in The Next Generation. The mention of the Takan Empire is from The Last Outpost, also The Next Generation. Quatlu's from the original series, etc. Let us now move on to part 2, as in episode 10. I hope you're not exhausted, because there's still quite a lot to cover. I'm exhausted. I wanted Mira Trek on the Tube to come in and replace me, but he said something about he'd already done a discussion instead of me in my place. I don't know what he's talking. No one asked you, Bob. And so we begin with the Mira Universe itself, or maybe an alternate version of it. Who knows how the temporal, universal nonsense and mechanics of it all work exactly. Mira Burnham talks about a coalition that wants to take down the Terran Empire. As we know, that does eventually come to pass with the rise of the Klingon-Cardassian alliance featured in Deep Space Nine. Among the number of recurring species she mentions as being a part of this coalition, such as the Endurians, for example, she also name drops a lesser-known species in the franchise, the Denobulans, represented for the first time in Enterprise by Dr. Phlox. Continuing on with our Mira Universe adventure, Mira Burnham gets put in an agony booth. We've seen these things before in almost all of our visits to this alternate timeline. The control panel is the same as it was in the first season of Discovery, and it is very similar in design to the one seen in the original series. It even comes with a detachable agonizer. Another piece of Mira Universe tech first seen in the original series makes an appearance, the Tantalus Field. The designs are almost identical, if not for a slight visual update. While we're on the subject of agony booths and other horrible torture-style pieces of technology, let me just point out that Discovery in this episode kills off quite a few Mira versions of the main cast. That is also very much a habit and a Star Trek tradition almost. Mira versions of the main cast are very often killed off. We don't just get Mira officers though, because even the .7s are evil. They have red eyes instead of the prime blue eyes. Another very small detail worthy of being pointed out that was noticed by our good friend Yerk over on Twitter were these paintings hanging around. They are both of Klingon ships featured before in the first season of discovery. The last few things I want to talk about when it comes to the Mirror Universe are what Georgio says to Saru and the opening credits themselves. The Emperor whispers words and ideas of change into Saru's ears. This is probably a nod to what Kirk did to Mirror Spock in the original series when he talks about other ways of doing things. And of course the opening credits were changed because this was a Mirror Universe episode. Here they were inverted, the colors were given the negative effect, and the images themselves were flipped upside down. It was a fun little change, nothing as grandiose as what Enterprise gave us with their Mirror Universe episodes and opening credits, but still a fun little thing to do. Alright, moving out and away from the Mirror Universe, the Emperor experienced 3 months worth of life, essentially in only a few minutes. We've seen that happen before to Picard in The Next Generation. Carl, the strange, all-powerful being on the planet's surface we just talked about earlier, reveals himself to be the Guardian of Forever. This is a character previously seen before in the original series and the animated series. In those iterations, he was a bit different in the sense that he seemed to only deal in time travel. He also seemed trapped on his barren homeworld, frankly, and also didn't seem capable of manifesting himself as a person like Carl, but Terra Firma establishes that the Guardian of Forever is in fact more than what we've seen previously. He had to leave his planet so he can clearly move around, he can obviously create an avatar for himself, and he can seemingly deal in alternate realities as well as time travel. I personally don't have any issues with this. Nothing previously established is broken or changed, it's simply enhanced, expanded upon. Also, the voice heard as he transforms and reveals his true identity is the voice from the first appearance of the Guardian of Forever in the original series. The last thing I want to mention is that for the first time ever on screen, if I'm not mistaken, we actually hear the words Mirror Universe. They were actually spoken on screen, as well as Prime, and traditionally it's just the fandom or it's just the marketing teams that call these universes Prime, or it's the production teams that call it Prime, Kelvin, Mira. We don't get those kind of names on screen, but yeah, I do think the first time they mentioned it was in episode 9, not in episode 10, but it was in this double-parter. It wasn't Terra Firma. Alright, that's all of it. Hot damn. There's so much to cover. Before I go, I do want to leave you with 2 more little things. They're not necessarily Easter eggs, just things that I want to talk about. One, I guess, is bad news, and one, I guess, is good news. No, that's not true. It's just a fun way of calling it. The bad news, so to speak, is 2 planets are featured in Terra Firma. One is Risa, the other is Danis 5, and there seems to be a slight visual effects mistake when it comes to the planet's rings. Let me explain. On the holographic display of Danis, and from the planet's surface, rings can be seen but not from orbit. Risa, however, has never had rings in orbit, and as you can see, this shot from the planet's surface and Discovery's very own holographic display of it both support that. However, when we get to Risa in the episode, we can see rings in the orbit shot. Now, the simplest thing to do would be switch the shots, but no, Danis has no cities, and Risa does. So technically, the planets are correct, it's just the rings that are around the wrong planet. It's not bad news, of course, I'm just kidding around. That was just a fun way to call it. It's a fun little mistake. The thing that I'm calling the good news is something that TrekCore tweeted out. You see, they pointed out the similarities between the very first shots of Georgio and Burnham walking together on the show and these shots that effectively depict the last we'll be seeing them together, even if one is the mirror version. Honestly, I had noticed the similarities in framing during my watches, but I didn't think they had made the shots look so similar. So mad props to everyone because it was an awesome thing to do. Alright, that's all of it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for putting up with Bob. If you want to hear Mirror Trek on the Tube's thoughts about this, you can go check out the Starfleet Boy discussion that they did together last week. Thank you so much to all the channel patrons. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends. I'm sorry this took a while to come out, but yeah, I wanted to do both episodes at once, and then of course that gives me a lot of work compiling all the Easter eggs, etc. Alright, see you next time. Live long and prosper.